This is sort of in the shadow of a story of, I think Paul Feinbaum talked about not expecting Alabama to go through with its scheduled home and home with Ohio State starting next season, so the 2027 season.
Okay.
And, Michigan has a game against Texas as well coming up here. And, Ohio State returns the favor with Texas this season. And certainly you look around the SEC and there's some headline matchups. I think Texas has Notre Dame in the future. Georgia has Clemson once again. I believe Georgia also has Ohio State coming up. And this is all in an even bigger shadow of the SEC going to 9 conference games under an even bigger shadow of the SEC perhaps being upset that schools like Texas this past season didn't make the playoff, with some looking at their loss to Ohio State and getting themselves a third loss as to why they didn't get in, which is not an unreasonable argument, but it also misses some other context with Texas's 2025 season.
Right.
So that Alabama does not want to risk having that crucial third loss come against a team like Ohio State and jeopardizing its ability to get into a 12-team playoff as the SEC moves to 9 conference games.
Right.
To me, it's all just sort of sad, right? It's sad that we as college football fans don't get a headline matchup like this come September. And these are schools, obviously, in Ohio State and Alabama that thrive in no small part because they do play big games, both in the postseason, regular season, and they have been teams unafraid to play big non-conference games in September, which adds to the surge of interest in the sport that season, because you do get those headline matchups in the first, second, third week, whatever. And it's good for the sport. It's good for those places in terms of solidifying their spots as like Alabama's on network TV all the time, playing big games. That helps Alabama's visibility, obviously. Not that Alabama needs help in terms of, the branding of the program, but to stay on top, it helps to win as many big games as you can. Ohio State has benefited from playing as many big games as they can, and they've been unafraid as well. And a lot of these SEC teams, right? Georgia's played these in recent years. Alabama's been unafraid. LSU has been unafraid. And so much to their credit, it's disappointing that these schools are looking at the calculus of the college football playoff and saying, well, we obviously play in a gauntlet of an SEC schedule. And now that we go to a 9-game schedule, it's now a mega gauntlet. And so their calculus is, if the out-of-conference schedule isn't weighted as appropriately as we think it should be weighted, then why even play those games? Because if Texas had scheduled, a far lesser team than Ohio State, then they'd be in the playoff, as if that's some kind of mountaintop to stand upon. Yes, we can lose to Florida. Of course we can weather a loss to Florida and still play in the college football playoff. It's kind of sad that puts fans in that position, and that it puts, people who just like strong matchups in September in that position. Obviously, you get it from these teams' perspective. Obviously, this is why, I guess the Big Ten was championing an auto bid situation so that you don't have a committee trying to weigh these things. And there are also counterpoints, obviously, that teams like Miami with their win over Notre Dame or Oklahoma with their win over Michigan was looked at favorably for having that kind of out-of-conference win when measured up against other teams considered for their spots in the college football playoff. So,
okay,
it's all just kind of sad to me.
So let me ask you this, because I talked on the last episode about, I think, a similar topic with our friend John Kurtz from Open for Business. But the comparison that we discussed was Texas Tech and its schedule in, say, 2026 versus BYU.
Right.
2 very, very different scheduling models. Texas Tech effectively plays nobody. Nobody in the offseason, even their non-conference slate works out pretty well for them. But it's very clear in their non-con slate that it's like Abilene Christian. Okay, right. It's nobody. On the BYU side, they obviously add Notre Dame. The schedule as a whole is, I think, a lot more difficult. Those are two very, very different ways to go about your schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Which is better? Texas Tech, less resistance. BYU, much to your point about Michigan, or I guess Oklahoma, Miami, there's a little bit more meat on the bone there.
Right.
I am curious to see how this works out in the long run for these schools. And I would say especially so on the SEC side if they keep falling short of the national championship.
Right.
Because one of the other things I talked about with John is this whole idea of credit scores for conferences. Where is the SEC's credit score at right now? Like, we know the external factors are still pumping up the conference. I still happen to believe it's a very deep conference with many good teams.
Yeah, and a lot of people care to watch. Yeah.
A lot of people care to watch. I mean, the same is true to an extent with the Big Ten.
For sure.
But to what end are they penalized, or should they be penalized, if the performance in the postseason isn't quite up to snuff? Isn't where it used to be under, say, like the Saban dynasty eras, or even more recently what we saw out of Georgia with Kirby Smart.
Right.
Very good teams.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Very deep conference. But at some point, does the SEC, if trends continue, does it need some of that validation of playing schools from other power conferences, bigger schools, in order to continue, I guess, that mantra of the SEC truly being a gauntlet where it just means more and it's tougher than everybody else?
I think it's all just a margin for error conversation that there has been conversation, I think rightfully so, about perhaps like Indiana's schedule, both within the Big Ten, not in 2025 and 2024, and their non-conference schedule moving forward. And so Indiana obviously did not schedule those future schedules with the like, oh, it's a gilded path to a top 4 seed. No, Indiana's been trying to make a bowl game. That's what Indiana's schedule has been. Scheduling MAC teams, scheduling an FCS game against like Indiana State. Last year it was ODU, right? That they're scheduling things to say like, if we're pretty decent, we can get to 6 or 7 wins, and it'd be pretty cool to play a 13th game. And now Indiana finds themselves in a position where they didn't think they'd be. So now the conversation around Indiana is, well, they better beat everybody by a bunch, because if look sort of sloppy against this schedule, they shouldn't get credit. And so if you're talking about that in the context of Texas Tech, they blew everybody out last year, not playing, I don't believe, a headline non-conference game outside of the Big 12.
Right.
So they blew everybody out. They took care of business, and they got to the playoff as a top 5 seed or whatever, and they nearly scored a point in the playoff. Again, though, beside the point, because they did what it took, and they didn't leave any doubt as a team that was worthwhile as a top 12 team. So now if you're talking about that within the context of the SEC, part of the SEC's pitch to America is that we're the best, we're the deepest. Look at our results in the postseason. Look at our results in the non-conference portion of the season. Look at all these headliners. Look at all these NFL draft picks. If they all come together and all of the SEC weenies circle the wagon and say, we're not going to play anybody.
Settle.
We're not going to play anybody in September. And we have this mega gauntlet of a schedule that, trust us, it's a mega gauntlet, because we don't have to prove it in September against good teams outside of the conference. You just have to trust us. And then their margin for error is reduced, because then they have to play against the best teams in the country in December and January in the college football playoff or in big bowl games. And then they once again don't play well. Then you can say, well, the SEC is just protecting itself against reality by not scheduling Ohio State or Michigan, or take your pick of, top 15 type teams, because they'd much rather tell you they're good than prove to you they're good, because their goal is to just end up in the postseason rather than, prove it on the field to end up in the postseason by beating teams out. So I'm not saying it's a bad strategy.
No,
I'm just saying
I do get it.
It runs counter to what SEC people have puffed their chests out about. Yeah. So that to me is the sad thing, because I think I'm not an SEC team fan. You're not an SEC team fan. We've enjoyed these games. We've enjoyed games like, LSU and Oregon and Alabama and Wisconsin and Georgia played Oregon. There's been a lot of these types of games, whether they're neutral site or home and home. It'd be sad to lose it. It'd be a little bit weird to lose it, considering all of these teams, not just SEC teams, have decided, oh, we're TV sellouts now. We're going to do everything we can to make TV happy with us. And then they're going to start canceling these TV games, whether they're home and home or whether they're neutral site games. It runs sort of counter to it, but I guess the biggest programs are able to dictate in a way that some other programs aren't. So once again, it's all sort of sad to me. I don't think we should look at Alabama as like weak and scared. I just think we're looking at the SEC as like what is the best thing for our bottom line and what is the best thing for our positioning. And if we don't have as many teams as we believe have earned the right to be in the postseason, then we look at this as a failure. So it's much more about, the goal of participation rather than winning. And so I guess they're looking for the ultimate participation trophy, getting into the college football playoff. They want to participate above all else, Ty, right?
I mean, I get it. You have to you understand the logic behind it.
Sure.
As a fan, I'm not going to act like I'm crazy about it.
Yeah, but then guess what happens in September? Lane Kiffin or Nick Saban or whoever starts complaining that people aren't showing up for their games and that the students aren't showing up for the games because they're scheduling way, way down often. So what's it going to be? I don't know. That's the question to me. What's the priority here? And so you'll have SEC fans complaining about schools like Indiana. You'll have people like Ohio State fans saying Alabama's running scared. And I don't know. I once again think the losers here are people who just enjoy college football.
Just want to watch a game in like week 2.
Yep.
When it's sunny out and you can watch the game on an iPad at a picnic table or, those are the fans are the losers. The fans want to see these high profile matchups early. I think it's a big part of why college football is special that early part of the season in September when you have some of these really high profile matches. This isn't to say they're all going away, but I don't, as a fan, speaking only as a fan, not from the perspective of the SEC or the Big Ten or Notre Dame or anybody.
But they don't care.
Just as a fan, I want to see more of these games. And it doesn't do a whole lot to dispel the narrative that the postseason isn't hurting the regular season.
Correct.
This is one of the ways where I think we've been waiting to see what's the impact going to be.
Right. How
will teams react? Will there be, an immediate and swift reaction to try and make it easier to get into the play? Well, this kind of supports that line of thinking.
Yeah. And look, I'm okay with anybody getting creative with scheduling. If you want all of the power conference teams to play 8 conference games, but have mandatory 2 Power 4 teams decided in a lottery system or in a tiered system where okay, you've been to a bowl game or the playoff and however many times, you can only draw from these 30 teams in the lottery. Let's get creative with it. Fine. But the idea of pulling out of these matchups, scheduling these cool matchups. You're also hurting fans like an Alabama fan who was like, I cannot wait to go to Columbus. That's a bucket list, go to the shoe and see a huge game like that and vice versa. You're hurting those fans. It's just, it's sort of sad that, you and your ilk, Ty, your expansionist ilk, another victim to the expansionist virus of college football.
Well, let's put it this way. If you want to get creative with scheduling, maybe even with the money.
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you that the First National Bank of Sacramento State is willing to hear your proposal.
It's true.
They are willing to hear your proposal.
Yeah.